So here's a quick overview of Loop HR core functions for the calendar and schedules in general. So first of all, the calendar itself is where all work hours or all paid hours are recorded. It is really, really, really essential that the hours are accurate. This is no different than if you were managing things outside of Loop. You would still need to record the hours. And I'm going to show you the benefit of doing it correctly within Loop. So you also have the option to plan your ideal template. This is not in the calendar, but it is in the template function. I'll show you briefly in a moment. And then the calendar itself is the central place to view all events. Again, I will show you that in a second. And then all data that is put into the calendar feeds through to payroll, so that the people managing payroll trust that the information is correct. They can then process payroll quickly and efficiently. And of course, you then have compliance reporting. As a manager, it's essential that you record the correct hours for compliance purposes. Okay. Now here we have a screen that you will be familiar with. This is the calendar overview, and you can see that it's quite busy with lots of different events. So I'm going to explain each of the events to you. Standard work hours right here would be, in the case of revenue producing people, it would be the orange schedule. And then you have overtime paid. Well, that's this overtime paid, but we also have overtime paid revenue producing, and that's this one. So as Loop defines whether somebody is revenue producing by color, just make it easy for you, I can see that this is overtime paid, but it's non-revenue producing. This is overtime paid and it's revenue producing. We also have overtime banked, and here is your overtime bank. This is non-revenue producing. And then what else do we have? We have reviews. Okay, so your performance development reviews are not managed in the calendar themselves. They're simply reported in the calendar so that there's a central place where you can overview each function within the system. You have your continual professional development, your reviews, again, managed separately, and the event is just put into the calendar. Likewise, with holidays, a holiday is requested, it's approved, and then it sits in the holiday function, but it also reports in the calendar. So as a manager, you have an overview. Then you also have sickness, again, managed outside of the calendar, but is reported into the calendar. So let's take a look at anything else that we have. So a late. If somebody is late and you choose to record that late, it is managed within the calendar itself because that's to do with work hours. And then one more thing, unpaid absence. You would only use this code for people who are salaried rather than paid by the hour. And on that point, if your team are paid by the hour, it is essential that the hours that show in the calendar are correct. Whatever the event is, it must be correct. Okay, let's move on. Very briefly, the template rota builder. As a manager, the feedback that we have had means to us that this is definitely a really popular tool now. So this is an example of a template rota for, in this case, Sarah and Ben, and they work a bi-weekly. You can see their week 1 schedule and their week 2 schedule. You can build bi-weekly, tri-weekly, or 4-weekly calendars, and you can import them into the calendar itself. Really simple and really, really valuable. Of course, just going back for a second, if there are day-to-day changes in somebody's work hours, you can simply click on the event and change it. But what I'm going to show you in just a moment is how to manage overtime. And what we're going to do is we're going to add 1 hour overtime. It's going to be paid revenue producing event. Now the employee target will increase by 1 hour, and the employee is paid for the overtime when payroll is processed. The employee may accrue holiday for the overtime work. That is down to the individual settings for that particular team member, if overtime is a regular function of what they do. And the employee will see any accrued holiday in their own dashboard, as of course will you, the manager, as of course will admins. And everything is logged and recorded in Loop HR. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to quickly add a 1 hour overtime event. So now we're going to add an event into the calendar itself. So come up a little bit. We find the employee who you want to add or change their event. Let's start first of all. We're going to select this team member, Sarah, and we want to add overtime to Saturday the 13th. We simply click inside the box and a modal window opens. It will default to the location that the team member works in and for the location of the calendar that you have open. If the team member is eligible to work in other locations, they will show in the list. Okay. Then you have your attendance code. A code will default for a revenue producing team member to a standard shift. So standard shift RP, as we said earlier. Let's click on that and you come down and you can now see overtime banked and overtime banked RP. This is if you want the team member to work overtime and bank the hours to take back at a later date, Loop HR will record the banked hours for you and report the banked hours to the team member as well. You could also say overtime banked, but I want to set a target for the hours that they're working overtime. In this particular case, we're going to do overtime paid, and we are going to have it as revenue producing. This would be the most common that people use in the scheduling. So that's very simple. We now have our overtime paid revenue producing. You can display the event time in the schedule, or if I uncheck this box, it will show overtime paid. You can even change this title here to whatever you want, but whatever you type here will show in the calendar. We're going to click continue. You can select multiple team members or all team members, but we're just going to stick with the one. And we know the date and the time. Well, it's going to default to the normal workday, but let's say we want them to work from 6 o'clock until 7 o'clock, 1 hour extra. There's no break, and we're not going to repeat the event. And if you wanted to put a note, you can. And remember that notes are visible to the team member. So as agreed, potentially, you now add your event. And here you can clearly see overtime paid. I hope that that's nice and clear. If you have any questions, please drop us a message via live chat.